In a quiet suburban neighborhood where every house looked like it had been plucked straight out of a home decor magazine, there lived a guy named Ethan. He wasn't flashy or loud, just your average Joe trying to live a peaceful life. Ethan worked as a graphic designer from his home office, designing logos and websites for clients across the country. His days were usually filled with coffee breaks, brainstorming sessions, and the occasional walk around his block to clear his head. Ethan's house wasn't the biggest on the street, but it was cozy. What made it stand out was the small swimming pool in the backyard. It wasn't one of those fancy infinity pools you see in movies. It was more like an old-school, no-frills kind of thing. The previous owner installed it years ago, and when Ethan bought the place, he decided to keep it. Over time, it became his little escape, a spot to relax after long work days or cool off during hot summer afternoons. But lately, the pool hadn't been getting much use. Life got busy, and Ethan found himself too caught up with deadlines to even think about swimming. Plus, maintaining a pool wasn't cheap. Between chemicals, filters, and repairs, the costs added up quickly. So the water sat stagnant most of the time, turning into a breeding ground for algae and mosquitoes. Every now and then, Ethan would glance at the greenish tint forming near the edges and sigh. Something had to be done. One sunny Saturday morning, Ethan woke up early, determined to tackle the problem once and for all. After doing some research online, he rented a submersible pump from a local hardware store. With everything set up, the hoses stretched across the yard, leading to the storm drain at the curb. He started draining the pool. Water gushed out steadily, creating a steady stream that flowed toward the street. As Ethan worked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Sure, it was just a pool, but fixing it felt like taking control of something small yet meaningful. For the first time in weeks, he felt productive. He hummed along to music playing softly from his phone, occasionally pausing to adjust the hose or check the progress. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Little did Ethan know trouble was brewing right across the street. There, peeking through her living room curtains, was Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, not always kindly, as HOA Karen. She had earned the nickname because of how seriously she took her role in the homeowners association. Whether it was making sure everyone's mailboxes matched or measuring grass length with a ruler, Karen made it her mission to enforce every rule, no matter how tiny or ridiculous. Karen spotted the water flowing out of Ethan's yard almost immediately. At first she squinted, thinking maybe she was imagining things. But as she watched, the trickle turned into a steady stream, snaking its way down the gutter. Her face twisted into a scowl. How dare someone disrupt the pristine order of the neighborhood? This wasn't just any Saturday, it was her Saturday, reserved for sipping herbal tea and reading HOA guidelines while basking in the glow of her perfect rose garden. Without wasting another second, Karen slipped on her sandals and marched across the street. Each step carried the weight of authority, though she was only wearing flip-flops. When she reached Ethan's driveway, she planted herself firmly, arms crossed, ready to confront whoever thought they could get away with such chaos. "Excuse me," Karen called out sharply, her voice cutting through the peaceful hum of the morning. Startled, Ethan turned around, still holding the end of the hose. He blinked at her, confused. "Yes?" he replied cautiously. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Karen demanded, pointing accusingly at the water spilling onto the pavement. Ethan blinked again, this time realizing what she meant. "Oh, I'm just draining my pool," he said calmly. "It needs cleaning, so I figured it was time to take care of it." Karen's expression darkened. "Did you even check the HOA rules before doing this?" she snapped. "You can't just dump water wherever you want. Do you have any idea how this affects the neighborhood?" Ethan frowned, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Actually, yes, I did check," he said evenly. "I followed all the city guidelines. The water is going into the storm drain, which is allowed, and trust me, I don't plan on flooding anyone's yard." But Karen wasn't having it. To her, this wasn't about logic or facts. It was about principle. In her mind, Ethan's actions were reckless, irresponsible, and downright disrespectful to the community standards she held sacred. She glared at him for a moment longer before spinning on her heel and storming back to her house, muttering under her breath about calling the proper authorities. Standing alone in his yard, Ethan sighed deeply. He shook his head, wondering how something as simple as draining a pool could turn into such a big deal. Still, he tried not to let it bother him too much. After all, he knew he hadn't broken any rules. What could possibly go wrong? Karen stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Her face was flushed red, a mix of anger and indignation boiling inside her. She paced around her living room, muttering under her breath about people these days and how no one seemed to care about following the rules anymore. In her mind, Ethan wasn't just draining his pool. He was committing an act of rebellion against everything she stood for. Her iPad sat on the coffee table, already open to the HOA guidelines document she'd been reviewing earlier that morning. Karen snatched it up, scrolling furiously through the pages as if searching for ammunition to justify her outrage. Sure enough, buried deep within the fine print, she found what she was looking for: a vague clause about water runoff and its potential impact on neighborhood aesthetics. It wasn't much, but to Karen it was more than enough. "This is unacceptable," she muttered to herself, tapping the screen emphatically. Absolutely unacceptable. But Karen didn't stop there. Oh no, this was far too serious to let slide. She grabbed her phone and dialed 2 numbers in quick succession. The first call went to the local police department. When the officer answered, Karen launched into an exaggerated explanation of the situation, painting Ethan as some kind of reckless troublemaker. "There's water everywhere," she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. "It's flooding, the streets creating a hazard for drivers and pedestrians alike. And I'm not sure, but it might even be toxic. You need to send someone over immediately." The officer on the other end tried to calm her down, asking for specifics, but Karen wasn't having it. She insisted they treat this like an emergency, refusing to hang up until they promised to send someone over right away. Once that call ended, Karen made her second call, to the president of the HOA. This time she sounded even more indignant, as though she were personally offended by Ethan's actions. "I don't know what's gotten into people," she said, shaking her head even though the person on the other end couldn't see her. "He's deliberately ignoring the rules, dumping water all over the place without a care in the world. We can't let this slide, or else everyone will start thinking they can do whatever they want." The HOA president, a middle-aged man named Bob, who had grown accustomed to Karen's frequent complaints, listened patiently. He assured her that he'd look into the matter, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly concerned. Still, Karen felt vindicated. She hung up the phone feeling like she'd done her duty, confident that justice would soon be served. Meanwhile, Ethan continued working in his backyard, completely unaware of the storm brewing across the street. He adjusted the hose one last time, making sure the water flowed smoothly toward the storm drain. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. The pool was nearly empty, and the algae-laden water was being replaced with fresh air and sunlight. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. Maybe now he could finally enjoy his backyard again. About 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Ethan froze, his heart sinking as he realized the noise was coming closer. Moments later, a police car pulled up in front of his house, lights flashing. Neighbors began peeking out their windows and stepping onto their porches, curious about what could possibly warrant such attention. Some whispered to each other while others snapped photos with their phones, eager to document the spectacle. Ethan walked to the front of his house, wiping his hands on his jeans as he approached the officers. 2 uniformed men stepped out of the patrol car looking slightly confused themselves. One of them greeted Ethan with a nod, while the other glanced at the water flowing gently into the storm drain. "Are you the homeowner here?" the first officer asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Is there a problem?" Before Ethan could say anything else, Karen appeared beside the officers, arms crossed and a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She looked like she'd won the lottery. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. As I mentioned on the phone, this gentleman has been flooding the streets with water from his pool. It's a safety hazard, and frankly, it's just unacceptable behavior. Ethan stared at her, dumbfounded. What? That's ridiculous. He shot back, turning to the officers. Look, I checked all the regulations before starting this project. I have the proper permits, and the water is going exactly where it's supposed to, the storm drain. There's no danger here. The officers exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension between the two neighbors. They spent a few minutes inspecting the scene, walking along the curb to examine the flow of water. To their trained eyes, it was obvious that nothing serious was happening. The water was moving steadily toward the drain, not pooling or causing any blockages. If anything, it looked like a routine pool maintenance job. Finally, the lead officer turned back to Ethan. From what we can see, everything seems to be in order, he said. Just make sure the water keeps flowing properly, and try to avoid any unnecessary disruptions. Other than that, there's no issue here. Karen's jaw dropped. She sputtered, pointing wildly at the water as if expecting the officers to change their minds. But this isn't right, she stammered. He's breaking the rules. He's ruining the neighborhood. The officers gave her a polite but firm smile. Ma'am, unless there's actual evidence of harm or violation, there's nothing we can do, the second officer explained. We'll leave it at that for now. With that, they returned to their car, leaving Karen standing there fuming. Ethan watched them drive away, then turned to face Karen, who was still glaring daggers at him. Really? He said, exasperated. You called the cops because I drained my pool? It's not about the pool, Karen snapped back, though her confidence was visibly shaken. It's about respecting the community and following the rules, something you clearly don't understand. Ethan shook his head, deciding it wasn't worth arguing further. He walked back to his yard, leaving Karen to stew in her frustration. As he resumed his work, he couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. Who would have thought draining a pool could turn into such a circus? Word of the incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. By evening, nearly everyone knew about Karen's dramatic showdown with Ethan, and opinions were divided. Some residents sympathized with Karen, agreeing that Ethan should have consulted the HOA before taking action. Others sided with Ethan, calling Karen petty and overbearing. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Linda, stopped by later that day to offer her support. Don't let her get to you, she said with a warm smile. Karen's always been like this. She once reported someone for having a garden gnome that was too colorful. Can you believe that? Ethan laughed despite himself. No offense, but I'm starting to think this neighborhood takes things a little too seriously. Linda nodded knowingly. You're not wrong. But hey, at least you stood your ground. That's something. As the sun set and the water finished draining from his pool, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that the ordeal was over. On the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Little did he know, Karen wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The next morning, news of the pool draining drama had spread like wildfire. It was the kind of story that made people pause during their morning coffee or gossip over backyard fences. Neighbors who barely knew each other suddenly found themselves bonding over exaggerated retellings of what happened. Some added dramatic flair to Karen's theatrics, mimicking her tone when she called the cops. Others joked about how Ethan must have felt like a criminal for doing something as ordinary as cleaning his pool. Karen, however, didn't see the humor in any of it. She woke up that day determined to reclaim control of the narrative. To her, this wasn't just about Ethan, it was about setting an example for the entire neighborhood. If one person could get away with ignoring the rules, then chaos would surely follow. That's what she believed, at least. First thing in the morning, Karen fired off a lengthy email to the HOA board members. In it, she outlined every detail of the incident, from the moment she spotted water flowing out of Ethan's yard to the arrival of the police officers. She included screenshots of the HOA guidelines, highlighting the vague clause about water runoff and its potential impact on community aesthetics. The email ended with a bold suggestion: stricter enforcement of pool maintenance policies, along with fines for anyone who failed to comply. To her surprise, the response from the HOA president, Bob, was lukewarm at best. He thanked her for bringing the issue to their attention but reminded her that Ethan hadn't actually broken any laws or HOA rules. "Let's focus on bigger priorities," Bob wrote back diplomatically. "Like fixing the potholes on Maple Street." Karen stared at the screen, fuming. How could they not see the gravity of the situation? In her mind, this wasn't just about a pool. It was about preserving the integrity of the neighborhood. But instead of backing down, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Over the next few days, she drafted a strongly worded letter addressed to all residents, reminding them of their responsibilities as homeowners. She even suggested organizing a meeting to discuss proper drainage practices. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to move on with his life. After finishing the draining process, he rented a pressure washer to clean the inside of the pool. The work was tedious but satisfying, giving him a sense of accomplishment. By the end of the week, the pool looked almost new again. Sparkling, white tiles and smooth concrete surfaces gleamed under the sun. For the first time in months, Ethan felt proud of his backyard. But the neighborhood buzz refused to die down. Anonymous posts began popping up in the local Facebook group, fueling the debate between those who supported Karen and those who sided with Ethan. One neighbor posted a meme comparing Karen to a seagull squawking over a French fry, which quickly went viral within the group. Another chimed in with a photo of their own garden gnome captioned, "Too colorful? Challenge accepted." Ethan scrolled through the comments late one night, shaking his head in disbelief. He never imagined his quiet weekend project would turn into such a spectacle. Part of him wanted to join the conversation, maybe crack a joke or two, but he decided against it. Engaging online would only fan the flames, and frankly, he didn't need the extra stress. Instead, he focused on finishing the job, hoping the whole thing would blow over soon. Karen, on the other hand, couldn't resist chiming in. She joined the Facebook thread, posting a lengthy comment defending her actions. "I understand some of you may find this amusing," she wrote, "but maintaining our neighborhood standards is no laughing matter. Without rules, we risk losing the very things that make this community special." Predictably, her post sparked a flurry of replies, many of them sarcastic or mocking. Someone even photoshopped a picture of Karen standing in front of a giant ruler, measuring the width of a blade of grass. Despite the backlash, Karen remained undeterred. She doubled down, convinced that she was fighting the good fight. Every morning she walked her dog around the block, stopping to chat with anyone willing to listen about the importance of following HOA guidelines. She handed out printed copies of her letter, urging neighbors to attend the upcoming meeting. Most people politely declined, pretending to be busy or distracted, but Karen didn't care. Even if only a handful of people showed up, she knew she'd still make her point loud and clear. As the days passed, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. What started as a minor disagreement between two neighbors had escalated into a full-blown feud, dividing the community into camps. Some residents admired Karen's dedication to enforcing the rules, seeing her as a protector of order and stability. Others viewed her as a tyrant, someone who cared more about trivial details than actual quality of life. Meanwhile, Ethan became an unlikely hero to many, a symbol of resistance against unnecessary bureaucracy. One evening, a group of neighbors gathered at Linda's house for an impromptu barbecue. Linda had invited Ethan, knowing he could use a break from the madness. As burgers sizzled on the grill and laughter filled the air, the conversation inevitably turned to Karen and her antics. "She's unbelievable," said Tom, a retired mechanic who lived 3 doors down from Ethan. "Last week, she left a note on my car because I parked in front of my own driveway for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Like it was some national security threat." Everyone burst out laughing, including Ethan. "Well, at least you got a note," he replied with a grin. "She sent the cops after me." "Honestly, I think she thrives on drama," added Maria, another neighbor. "It's like she doesn't know how to relax unless she's mad at someone." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That might be true, but we can't let her behavior ruin our neighborhood spirit. We're better than this. Let's show her that we value kindness and cooperation over nitpicking." Her words resonated with everyone present. For the first time in days, the mood shifted from frustration to determination. Maybe they couldn't change Karen overnight, but they could choose how to respond to her, and that realization gave them hope. Back at her house, Karen sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. She had spent hours crafting yet another email to the HOA board, outlining additional suggestions for improving neighborhood compliance. But as she hit send, a wave of doubt washed over her. Was she really making a difference, or was she pushing people away? Deep down, she knew the answer, but admitting it would mean letting go of the one thing that gave her purpose. Outside, the sky grew dark, signaling the end of another chaotic day. The neighborhood lights flickered on, casting warm glows across manicured lawns and trimmed hedges. Despite the tension, there was still beauty in the little community, a reminder that even amidst conflict, life goes on. For now, Ethan focused on refilling his pool, while Karen plotted her next move. Neither realized that the real test of their resilience was yet to come, and it would arrive in the form of nature itself. The neighborhood had barely recovered from the pool-draining drama when Mother Nature decided to throw her own curveball. A few days later, dark clouds rolled in, blanketing the sky in shades of gray. The weather forecast warned of heavy rain, but no one paid much attention. After all, it was just another summer storm. What could possibly go wrong? Karen, however, was thrilled. She loved rainy days because they gave her an excuse to stay indoors and work on her HOA initiatives. Sitting at her dining table with a cup of chamomile tea, she reviewed the list of complaints she planned to present at the upcoming meeting. Everything from overgrown hedges to mismatched house numbers made the cut. To Karen, these were pressing issues that demanded immediate action. As the first drops of rain hit her window, she smiled smugly, feeling validated in her crusade for perfection. Ethan, on the other hand, welcomed the rain as a chance to relax. He'd spent the past week scrubbing his pool clean and refilling it with fresh water. Now that the hard work was done, he looked forward to enjoying the fruits of his labor. He grabbed a blanket, settled onto his couch, and turned on some music, letting the rhythmic patter of raindrops lull him into a state of calm. But the storm had other plans. By evening, the rain hadn't let up. In fact, it intensified, turning streets into rivers and lawns into soggy messes. Water gushed through gutters, spilling over curbs and pooling in low-lying areas. Neighbors scrambled to move potted plants indoors and cover outdoor furniture, while children gleefully splashed in puddles. It was chaos, but the fun kind, until it wasn't. Across the street, Karen's meticulously manicured lawn began to flood. Her prized rose bushes, which she'd nurtured for years, were submerged under inches of muddy water. The carefully arranged stones lining her flower beds shifted and sank, leaving behind a disheveled mess. Worst of all, her front porch, a spot she often used for sipping tea and observing the neighborhood, was now ankle-deep in water. Panic set in. Karen rushed outside in her slippers, clutching a broom like a weapon. She tried sweeping the water away, but it kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. Her frustration boiled over as she realized the storm drains near her house weren't working properly. Instead of channeling water away, they were clogged, causing the overflow to worsen. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, stomping back, inside to grab her phone. She dialed the city's public works department, demanding immediate assistance. When they told her crews were tied up dealing with more urgent flooding elsewhere, she hung up in disgust. How could this be happening? This was her street, her neighborhood. Surely someone should prioritize fixing the problem here. As the night wore on, the situation grew worse. By morning, Karen's yard resembled a swamp. Her roses drooped pitifully, their vibrant colors dulled by mud. Even her mailbox, painted to match her front door, tilted precariously to one side. For the first time in years, Karen felt powerless and humiliated. She avoided eye contact with neighbors passing by, knowing full well they'd seen the damage. What Karen didn't realize, at least not right away, was that part of the problem stemmed from debris left behind by Ethan's drained pool. During the storm, Loose leaves, dirt, and algae remnants had been swept into the storm drains, creating blockages. While Ethan had followed proper procedures during the draining process, the aging drainage system in the neighborhood simply couldn't handle the sudden influx of water combined with the accumulated debris. When Karen finally pieced this together, her initial reaction was predictable: outrage. She stormed across the street, ready to confront Ethan yet again. But something stopped her in her tracks. As she stood there, dripping wet and shivering, she noticed the irony of the situation. Here she was, accusing others of neglecting the community, while her own obsession with trivial rules had blinded her to bigger issues, like maintaining the neighborhood's crumbling infrastructure. For the first time, doubt crept into Karen's mind. Maybe she'd gone too far. Maybe her constant nitpicking wasn't helping anyone. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, though she refused to admit it out loud. Meanwhile, Ethan woke up to find his freshly cleaned pool sparkling under the cloudy sky. Despite the gloomy weather, he felt a sense of accomplishment. His backyard looked better than ever, and the sound of rain added a soothing backdrop to the scene. But when he stepped outside to check the mail, he spotted Karen glaring at him from her driveway. At first, he braced himself for another confrontation, but instead of yelling or pointing fingers, Karen surprised him. "We need to talk," she said curtly, motioning for him to follow her. Reluctantly, Ethan complied, curious about what she wanted. Karen led him to the edge of her property, where the flooded storm drain was clearly visible. "This is your fault," she began, her voice trembling, not with anger but with vulnerability. "The debris from your pool clogged the drains, and now my yard is ruined." Ethan frowned, studying the blocked drain. "I'm sorry if that happened," he replied honestly, "but I followed all the guidelines when I drained my pool. If anything, this shows how outdated our drainage system is. It can't handle even normal wear and tear." Karen opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Deep down she knew he was right. The storm drains had been neglected for years, and she'd ignored the problem because it didn't fit neatly into her vision of community standards. Now, standing in the middle of her flooded yard, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. "I'll help you clean it up," Ethan offered, surprising both of them. "It's not fair for you to deal with this alone." Karen hesitated, caught off guard by his kindness. For so long, she'd viewed Ethan as the enemy, the guy who broke the rules and disrupted her perfect world. But seeing him offer assistance, without hesitation, made her question everything she thought she knew. "Fine," she said stiffly, though her tone softened slightly. "Let's get to work." Over the next few hours, Ethan and Karen teamed up to clear the storm drains. They shoveled mud, pulled out debris, and redirected water flow using makeshift barriers. It was messy, exhausting work, but oddly therapeutic. As they labored side by side, their conversations shifted from tense accusations to cautious, small talk. Karen learned that Ethan worked from home designing websites, while Ethan discovered that Karen volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. By the time they finished, the worst of the flooding had subsided. Karen's yard still looked like a disaster zone, but at least the water was receding. Exhausted but satisfied, they stood together, surveying their handiwork. "Thanks for helping," Karen said awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. "I guess, maybe, I overreacted before." Ethan shrugged, offering a small smile. "No harm done. We're neighbors after all. Let's just try to keep things simple moving forward, okay?" Karen nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. For the first time in ages, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her yard, but for the neighborhood as a whole. As the sun peeked through the clouds, casting golden light over the soggy streets, the tension between Ethan and Karen began to dissolve. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start, and sometimes that's all it takes to turn conflict into connection. The cleanup effort left both Ethan and Karen physically drained but emotionally lighter. As they parted ways, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile truce that neither expected nor fully trusted, but one that felt necessary after everything that had happened. For Karen, it marked the beginning of a shift in perspective. though she wasn't ready to admit it just yet. And for Ethan, it was proof that even the most stubborn people could change when given the chance. Over the next few days, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such a chaotic week. The rain had stopped, leaving behind damp lawns and muddy sidewalks. Neighbors emerged from their homes to assess the damage, sharing stories of flooded basements and toppled trees. Some grumbled about the weather, while others laughed off the inconvenience, grateful that nothing worse had occurred. Karen spent those days nursing her battered pride along with her ruined garden. She replanted what remained of her rose bushes, carefully patting soil around their roots as if tending to old wounds. Every time she looked at her soggy yard, she couldn't help but think about the storm drains, and how her relentless focus on minor infractions had blinded her to bigger problems like infrastructure maintenance. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one she knew she needed to take. Meanwhile, Ethan busied himself with finishing touches on his backyard oasis. With the pool now sparkling clean and refilled, he decided to host a small gathering to thank the neighbors who had supported him during the ordeal. He sent out casual invitations via text messages and handwritten notes, keeping things low-key to avoid stirring up unnecessary attention. Still, word spread quickly, and by Saturday evening a modest crowd had gathered in his backyard. There were folding chairs set up near the pool, strings of fairy lights twinkling overhead. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker, filling the air with soft music. Plates of homemade snacks circulated among guests, accompanied by cold drinks and laughter. It was the kind of laid-back event the neighborhood hadn't seen in years. Simple, warm, and genuinely enjoyable. Linda, the retired teacher who'd offered Ethan support earlier, arrived carrying a tray of brownies. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, smiling as she handed him the tray. A little reminder that life doesn't have to be so serious all the time. Ethan chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, I figured it was time to celebrate surviving Poolgate." The comment drew laughs from nearby neighbors, including Tom, the retired mechanic. "You know, I don't think anyone's ever going to forget that story," he said, raising his soda can and a mock toast. "Here's to breaking rules and draining pools." Everyone cheered, clinking glasses and bottles together. Even Maria, the neighbor who joked about Karen's obsession with drama, chimed in with a light-hearted quip. "Honestly, I'm just glad no one called the fire department too. That would have been the cherry on top." As the night went on, conversations turned toward the future of the neighborhood. People shared ideas for improvements, fixing potholes, planting more trees, hosting regular block parties. There was a sense of optimism in the air, a collective desire to move past the pettiness that had divided them for so long, but not everyone was ready to let go of old grievances. Across the street, Karen watched the festivities from her living room window, arms crossed and expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to join in, to be part of the camaraderie she saw blossoming in Ethan's backyard. But another part, the part that still clung to her role as HOA enforcer, held her back. She convinced herself that attending would send the wrong message, that it might look like she was condoning rule-breaking behavior. Still, she couldn't deny the pang of loneliness that settled in her chest as she watched her neighbors laugh and share stories without her. For years, she'd prided herself on being the voice of authority, the one who kept everyone in line. Now she wondered if that identity had cost her something far more valuable: genuine connections. Later that night, as the party began winding down, Linda approached Ethan with a thoughtful look on her face. "You know, I think tonight showed us something important," she said quietly. "We're stronger when we work together instead of tearing each other apart." Ethan nodded, glancing toward Karen's house. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. Maybe it's time to extend an olive branch." Linda smiled knowingly. "Good idea. Sometimes forgiveness starts with a conversation." The next morning, Ethan decided to act on that thought. He baked a batch of cookies, not because he was particularly skilled in the kitchen, but because it felt like a friendly gesture. Armed with the plate of slightly uneven chocolate chip treats, he walked across the street and knocked on Karen's door. When she opened it, Her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly, though her tone lacked its usual edge. "I brought these for you," Ethan said, holding out the plate. "Just, you know, as a thanks for helping with the storm drains the other day." Karen hesitated, then reluctantly took the cookies. "They're not poisoned, are they?" she joked weakly, attempting humor for the first time in ages. Ethan grinned. "No guarantees, but I promise they're edible." For a brief moment they shared a laugh, a real one, free of tension or resentment. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it signaled a turning point. Karen stepped aside, inviting Ethan in for a cup of tea. They sat at her kitchen table, talking awkwardly at first, but gradually opening up about their lives. Ethan learned that Karen's strictness stemmed from a deep-seated fear of losing control, while Karen discovered that Ethan wasn't the reckless rebel she'd imagined him to be. By the end of their conversation, Karen surprised herself by admitting, "I might have overreacted about the pool thing." Ethan raised an eyebrow, pretending to be shocked. "No way, you mean calling the cops on me was a bit much?" Karen rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Okay, fine. Maybe I went a little overboard. But you have to admit it made for quite the story." "True," Ethan agreed. "And hey, at least we fixed the storm drains together. That counts for something, right?" Karen nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her relationship with Ethan, but for the neighborhood as a whole. Perhaps it was possible to enforce rules without alienating people, to care about details without losing sight of the bigger picture. As Ethan left her house later that afternoon, Karen stood at her window watching him return to his backyard. Her gaze lingered on the pool, now shimmering under the sunlight. She realized then that the water flowing through those storm drains carried more than just debris. It carried lessons about resilience, humility, and the power of community. And, maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood was finally ready to embrace those lessons too. The weeks that followed Ethan and Karen's tea and cookies chat marked a subtle but noticeable shift in the neighborhood. It wasn't an overnight transformation, no grand declarations or dramatic speeches, but rather a series of small, meaningful moments that added up to something bigger. For the first time in years, the community began to feel less like a collection of houses bound by rules, and more like a group of people sharing a common space. Karen, who had always prided herself on being the strict enforcer of HOA guidelines, started softening her approach. She still attended meetings and raised concerns when necessary, but her tone changed. Instead of barking orders or pointing fingers, she asked questions and listened. When a neighbor accidentally painted their mailbox a shade darker than regulation, beige, Karen surprised everyone by simply reminding them of the rule and then offering to help repaint it herself. At first, people were skeptical. Was this the same Karen who once sent a strongly worded letter about holiday decorations staying up past January 15th? But as her behavior consistently improved, so did the way others viewed her. Some even began to see glimpses of the person she used to be before the weight of perfecting the neighborhood consumed her. A kind-hearted woman who cared deeply about her surroundings and the people in them. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself stepping into a new role, peacemaker. After hosting his backyard gathering, he became someone neighbors turned to for advice or support. If two residents argued over parking spaces or noisy lawnmowers, Ethan would step in with a calm demeanor and practical solutions. His ability to diffuse tension earned him respect, and soon, people looked to him not just as the guy with the pool, but as a leader within the community. One evening, the neighborhood held its annual summer barbecue, a tradition that had fallen by the wayside in recent years due to growing tensions. This time, however, attendance was higher than ever. Families brought dishes to share, kids ran around playing tag, and adults gathered around picnic tables swapping stories. The atmosphere buzzed with laughter and camaraderie, a stark contrast to the quiet resentment that had lingered for so long. Karen showed up too, carrying a platter of deviled eggs. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she stayed for hours, chatting with neighbors and even cracking a few jokes. At one point, Linda pulled Ethan aside and whispered, "Look at her. I haven't seen Karen smile like that in years. Ethan grinned, watching Karen laugh at something Tom had said. Yeah, turns out she's not so bad once you get past the clipboard phase. As the night wore on, the conversation naturally turned to ideas for improving the neighborhood. Someone suggested organizing monthly cleanup days to tackle issues like clogged storm drains and littered parks. Another proposed starting a community garden where residents could grow vegetables and flowers together. Even Karen chimed in, advocating for better lighting along certain streets to improve safety after dark. By the end of the evening, a list of actionable goals had been scribbled onto a napkin, complete with volunteers ready to take charge. It was a far cry from the divisive arguments of the past, when discussions often ended in frustration or silence. This time, there was unity, a shared commitment to making things better, not just for themselves, but for future generations. A few days later, Ethan received a text message from Karen. It was short and to the point. Thanks for the cookies, let me know if you need help with anything. He stared at the screen for a moment, then chuckled softly. Who would have thought those slightly burnt chocolate chip cookies would pave the way for such a turnaround? Over the next few months, life in the neighborhood continued to improve. Storm drains were cleared regularly, thanks to a rotating schedule coordinated by Ethan and Karen. Potholes on Maple Street finally got fixed after Bob, the HOA president, convinced the city council to prioritize the repairs. And the community garden idea took root, literally with plots assigned to eager participants, including Karen, who proudly tended to her section of sunflowers. Even the Facebook group, once a breeding ground for snarky comments and passive-aggressive posts, transformed into a positive space. Neighbors shared tips on gardening, recommended local services, and organized events like movie nights under the stars. Someone even started a thread titled, "Things We're Grateful For," which quickly filled with heartfelt messages about friendship, resilience, and second chances. For Ethan, the biggest change came in how he viewed his home. Before, it had been just a place to live, a roof over his head and a quiet spot to work. Now it felt like part of something larger, a piece of a puzzle that fit perfectly alongside others. He spent more time outdoors, whether lounging by the pool or chatting with passing neighbors. Life felt richer, fuller, and infinitely more rewarding. As for Karen, she rediscovered joy in the little things. Her rose bushes bounced back stronger than ever, their vibrant blooms earning compliments from passers-by. She volunteered more at the animal shelter, finding solace in caring for creatures who couldn't care for themselves. And though she occasionally slipped back into old habits, like leaving polite notes about lawn maintenance, her intentions were no longer rooted in control, but in genuine concern for the community. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan hosted another gathering, this time to celebrate the success of the neighborhood's collective efforts. Kids played football in the cul-de-sac while adults sipped hot cider and admired the newly planted trees lining the streets. As Ethan stood by the grill flipping burgers, Karen approached him holding 2 mugs of steaming cocoa. "Here," she said, handing him one. "Thought you might need a break." Ethan accepted it gratefully, raising the mug in a silent toast. "To teamwork," he said with a grin. Karen smiled back, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "And to second chances," they clinked their mugs together, the sound barely audible over the hum of happy chatter. In that moment, surrounded by friends and neighbors, both Ethan and Karen realized something important. Sometimes the smallest acts, like draining a pool or baking cookies, could lead to the biggest changes. It wasn't about perfection or control anymore. It was about connection, understanding, and working together to create something beautiful. And as the golden hues of sunset bathed the neighborhood in warmth, they knew this was only the beginning of a brighter chapter for everyone involved. The end.